Good morning. Today, I want to speak on acceptance as a path to peace. There's a quote from Henry Wadsworth Longfellow that says, "For after all, the best thing one can do when it is raining is to let it rain." You know, acceptance is about making peace with what is. It's about making peace with our present circumstances. It's been said by philosophers of old, it's been said by many people that, often, quite often, we can't control what happens, only how we respond to what happens or what's happening. And so we can think of acceptance like sitting by the lake, looking up at the sky and just watching the clouds go by. We don't feel attached to any particular shapes of clouds or how they stay. And, there's no holding on. We're just observing and we're accepting what's here. And, we've all been there in that peaceful feeling where we can just let be what is, right? And there's nothing in us that's resisting. And we're just feeling aligned with the present moment. And we're aligned with what life is bringing. Eckhart Tolle talks about how whatever the present moment is bringing, work with it, not against it. Work with it, not against it. Act as if you have chosen it, whatever it is. And, of course, this is easy when everything is going well. And it's not always easy because so often we face things in life that we are pretty sure we didn't choose and that we didn't want. And so that is the moment when the mystery of our life journey seems to ask, it almost seems to demand that we go deeper and that we might discover something deeper than we've ever found even in ourselves. In the analogy of watching the clouds, at times we might easily accept and even enjoy their puffy white formations. But other times we might feel resistance to them, to their big, dark gray, ominous, threatening storm clouds, right? That might bring lightning and thunder. And, that's part of why I chose that Joni Mitchell song, Both Sides Now, that I sang earlier, because she so poetically talks about clouds and love and life, seeing both sides or both views, the one view that's accepting and embracing, and the other that's resisting and feeling perhaps disillusioned by life. In her first verse, she describes clouds as, bows and flows of angel hair and ice cream castles in the air and feathered canyons everywhere, right? It's an enchanted view of clouds, right? But then she sings, but now they only block the sun. They rain and snow on everyone. So many things I could have done, but clouds got in my way. The last line of the chorus goes, I really don't know clouds at all, or love at all, or life at all. And so, you feel her wrestling with understanding life, why it's magical sometimes and it's enchanting sometimes, and other times it's so hard, and she describes how hard it is to accept the hardship. And yet, peace comes with acceptance. Peace comes when we can finally let go of resisting and fighting what is. Because to argue with what is to add more suffering to it. The Buddhists talk about, they have a teaching called 2 arrows. The first arrow is the initial suffering, and the second arrow is the story that we keep telling about the suffering in our resistance and how it's not okay. That's kind of the unnecessary added suffering. But there is an inner divine presence, as Laura was just pointing us to, that is already at peace, that is within us. It's peace itself. And it's felt as this spacious, loving beingness. And that spacious, loving beingness has room for our struggle. It has room for our resistance. It has room and a compassionate spaciousness for us to go through our process of getting to acceptance. And that spaciousness doesn't judge, it allows. It's a loving, unconditional presence. And it's okay for us to not be accepting. Sometimes that's not our authentic truth. We are feeling resistance and we're in that, or we're feeling scared. And that's okay. It's actually okay for us to need to deny something until we're ready. The mind, when it's shocked by something, it needs time to get to acceptance. And so even denial has a place. We can accept that. We can accept the presence of denial and see that it gives us time to process things. It keeps us sane while we work at acceptance. Carl Jung had a heart attack, and he describes how his experience, right after the heart attack was incredibly painful. And he describes it as a process of defoliation. He said, everything I aimed at, or everything I wished or thought, the whole phantasmagoria of earthly existence fell away or was stripped from me. Dealing with an unexpected illness or a loss in a fire or a loss of a relationship, it can ask so much of us, right? And to get to where we can accept it is not resignation, because acceptance is a response. It's a response that actually allows us to open to a new chapter of profound growth and change and transformation, whereas resignation is a kind of reaction. I'm reading a really powerful book right now called The Wild Edge of Sorrow by the psychotherapist Francis Weller. And he writes about a man who was coming to see him for therapy. And the man had recently had a heart attack, and the man was really deeply shaken from his experience of the heart attack. And he was this high-powered man in a position of authority, and he was anxious to return to his former status, as the top of the chain of command. And Francis, sat and listened to him and listened to his story over several weeks. And he could see that this man was desperate to reclaim his former strength. And so one day, Francis said to him, I'm concerned that you're going to waste a perfectly good heart attack, which is a strange kind of thing to say. But then he went on to explain to the man, he said, you're so committed to returning to how things were, but have you stopped to consider that those were the conditions that brought about the heart attack in the first place? Your work now is to hear what your heart is telling you. I think of heart disease. I mean, it's the number one health issue in our country, and it's kind of like, collectively, what are our hearts telling us in this world, in this society? To me, in my opinion, they're telling us we need to open them more. We need to be less busy and share, give and receive more love, and also embrace everything with a lot of loving kindness and compassion. That's what my heart tells me, when I listen. So this therapist, Francis, was telling this man, that he said, you've turned your back on many things, your love and your friendships and your body, and your heart is filled with grief. And this heart attack is telling you something. Please listen. Please listen. And it was a difficult thing for this man to do, because something radical was being asked of him. Sometimes a heart attack or an illness or a loss changes everything in our lives. And it throws us into a place of great uncertainty, and the old world is left behind, really, and something deeper of our life is calling us towards it, and it is the great unknown, and it holds riches for our soul if we can get to acceptance and trust. And of course, it takes the time that it takes. It's like alchemy, when you turn metal into gold. I feel that one of our biggest Earth School lessons here is to really learn to embrace everything that life is, especially welcoming everything we might like to avoid. And when we slowly start to allow all the feelings and see that every emotion, everything we experience, both the sweet and the bitter, the beautiful and the painful, can grow the immensity of our soul. That's when we're learning to live with greater acceptance, greater alignment with life. Kat Duff wrote a book called The Alchemy of Illness, and her goal was to restore mystery and dignity to the experience of being sick. And she writes, "We are not responsible for our illnesses. We are responsible to them, to what they offer and require of all of us, sick and well alike. Ancient peoples have taught us how to honor and utilize illnesses as special resources on our spiritual journey." That's a different view in some ways than the kind of narrow new thought view that we have to deny sickness and we have to affirm it right out of our lives, right? I personally feel like we need a more holistic view, of considering that all life experiences have value. I have a song, one of my songs, Embrace It, says, "Embrace it, all that seems dark, embrace it, all that seems unlovable, and be whole again." At some time or other, we're going to all have life experiences that are hugely challenging our ability to accept. Good things are easy, but life brings a full plate of experiences, a smorgasbord. And sometimes what we face feels very difficult to embrace. I read the most beautiful poem this week called The Healing Time. The Healing Time. It's by a woman named Pesha Gertler, and it goes, "Finally, on my way to yes, I bumped into all the places where I said no to my life. All the untended wounds, the red and purple scars, those hieroglyphs of pain carved into my skin and bones, those coded messages that send me down the wrong street again and again. Where I find them, the old wounds, the old misdirections, and I lift them one by one close to my heart, and I say, holy, holy." When we speak of embracing everything, we must include those untended wounds that she speaks of and embrace them with love and see them as holy, as begotten really by our courageous willingness to be here and live life, right? In one of the classes I'm taking, we were discussing how our understanding of God evolves as we evolve. And we were talking about how unity and our philosophy in unity is evolving as well. Back in the early days of unity forming, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore and their philosophy forming, their focus was on the use of affirmations and affirming, good and denying the negative. And that back then was really unheard of. I mean, back then, traditional Christianity was kind of about, originally being sinful. So the positive was just such a beautiful new idea for a lot of people. But the focus on the good and the focus on the positive without allowing for all of our feelings and all of our experiences, it can turn into something called toxic positivity. There's actually a term in psychology these days called toxic positivity gaslighting. I don't think the Fillmores had that back then. But that's where we're pressured to only be positive, and we're made to feel that we have to suppress any negative emotions or reactions or experiences. And unfortunately, what that does is it invalidates our very human experience. It's not healthy, and it's actually very isolating. Leaves us feeling isolated, like we're doing something wrong if we ever have any negative feelings. I am actually really grateful for my background being the yogic path, the Hindu and Buddhist path, because way before, I discovered New Thought, I learned the Four Noble Truths in Buddhism, which the first truth is that there is suffering, that it's unavoidable and it's just part of life. But then the other three noble truths are that we can explore the causes of suffering, and there's a path for us to follow to move through the suffering we face. In other words, it's essential to accept what is, to begin to work with it, right? Accept it to begin to transform it. Eckhart Tolle writes that suffering is a natural part of life and it has a noble purpose. And to hold the thought that we shouldn't suffer is the ego, the mind resisting the nature of existence and form. I've never been somebody who liked crosses, right? The cross. And my great grandmother, when I was, I think a teenager, she gave me this beautiful silver cross with Jesus on it, and to hang on the wall, and it was precious to her. And I loved that it was a gift from her, but it kind of disturbed me. I just wasn't sure how I felt about it. And later on, as I evolved, my understanding grew, and I realized that I think part of what was hard for me is that Christianity was focusing so much on the suffering versus the way out of the suffering, the way through the suffering. And so, these days I actually see even a wider view of the cross as a symbol of not only the suffering in the world, but as a symbol of surrender and openness, to the way our suffering can catapult our awakening. It can catapult our evolution. You've heard that saying, we all have our cross to bear, but I feel like that need not be in vain. I believe that maybe through the suffering, through the bearing, we grow exponentially and we bring something more to the ever expanding infinite love and infinite being that we call God or spirit or source or presence. So it's important to remember that we are not alone in our journey, right? I really wish we could all sit in circle more often and share, because we'd realize, we'd find so much comfort in hearing each other's struggles. We'd realize we're all together in this. There's another poem Henry Longfellow wrote, again using the metaphor of clouds and rain. He wrote, "Be still, sad heart, and cease repining. Behind the clouds is the sun still shining. Thy fate is the common fate of all, and to each life some rain must fall." He loves to use the analogy of rain. So to complete my point, while it's very useful and it's very important to use affirmation and affirmative thinking, we have to also leave room for an acceptance of all our feelings and experiences without judgment. And we have to be careful not to make anybody wrong when they're not feeling positive, right? We can't begin to heal until we can first be honest about how we feel, right? So I have a story that illustrates what I'm saying. It's something that happened, something I experienced just I think it was 5 days after 9/11 happened. I was scheduled to do music up in Medford at the Center for Spiritual Living. I was just doing the music, and then we had a speaker that was kind of a famous author, and she'd written a number of books on prosperity and money. And in my inner guidance for choosing music that Sunday, I felt we were all still in this collective shock and grief and sadness. So I chose these songs that were comforting, that actually kind of help people cry and feel safe and, open up and let go of some of that they were feeling. And so I was really surprised when the speaker, because her books were all about prosperity and money, that she didn't change her talk to address 9/11 and what had just happened. She spoke on, being a money magnet. And it just kind of felt out of touch. It felt in denial, really, and I realized it was the talk she had prepared and all her books that she had brought, but it felt disjointed. It was kind of like the elephant in the room. And, it felt like that kind of toxic positivity, trying too hard to just almost deny something that we needed to just be with and embrace. So it was a teaching for me, really, to try to always meet the moment authentically. It's okay if we're not always chipper and happy and positive. We can be sad together, and let that be okay. Let that be real. Let that be authentic. Let it be a relief. Give each other permission, right? Hmm. So we practice acceptance in many circumstances in our lives. Sometimes it's a collective event like 9/11. Sometimes it's a personal event. Sometimes it's something that's happening in the moment. You're facing a situation, and how you respond can save your life even. I have a story I got from Moth Radio, from NPR. It's actually kind of a humorous example of how accepting and working with our situation can hugely affect how it turns out. It's told by this woman, Randy Skaggs from Louisville, Kentucky. She was alone on a dark street when a man came up and he said, "Give me some money, lady. You wouldn't be the first person I killed." And she considered running, but she was slow. So she did what she does best when she's nervous. She starts talking and she says, "I don't have it as bad as you do, sir, but I'm sleeping on the floor right now, and all I ever eat are ramen noodles, and not that I lost weight or anything." People from Kentucky call and they say, "Oh my God, New York City, wow." And I don't have the heart to tell them, "Oh, I'm just a cliche. I'm the kid who moved here to change the world with her theater, but I'm not going to change the world. My theater stinks, really. I miss my mom. I miss my porch swings. I miss sweet tea. So would you please not kill me so I can just go back home where I belong?" And the robber looks at her funny, he tilts his head, and then he pulls her into a bear hug. And it was her first human contact in months, actually. And then he leaves, and she doesn't get robbed. She gets hugged. And I just, I find this story endearing, and funny. And of course, all robberies don't turn out this well. But in this case, she kept her cool and she just embraced and accepted this difficult situation and started talking to the guy, like she was sharing with a good friend. And she shifted the whole situation. I think I might have told you guys a few months ago about my robbery story. Me and my girlfriend were out late one night. I think it was her birthday. But in that case, I was arguing with the guy. I was trying to talk him. I was telling him why he shouldn't be robbing us. He had asked for some money. And my girlfriend was the smarter one. She took a wad of ones out of her purse. She was a waitress, gave it to him. And so that was that with her. But he grabbed my purse because I wasn't, accepting. So then I lost, my credit cards and my checkbooks and my driver's license and a whole lot of stuff. So the moral of that story is that when life brings us challenging moments and situations, as Tolle says, work with them, not against them. So in closing, acceptance is a spiritual practice. It's a skill we can become skillful at. It's a quality that we can cultivate that allows us to meet what life is bringing with greater awareness and, with some inner sense of peace that comes from deep trust in life, a deep trust in the spirit within us to meet life as it is. Trust in that, trust in the spirit within you to meet life as it is. So I hope this talk has been insightful. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear what you're learning in your own journey with acceptance. So may you and may all your relations and may all beings be at peace. May it be so. Om Shanti.